We do have our regular scheduled visit with Frank Gaffney, one of the people I admire most in this town. Frank, good morning, President of Center for Security Policy. A couple of great topics to talk to you about today, but the main one, and we have a clip of Nikki Haley talking about this, hopefully we'll get to later, but the U.S. withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council. I think the UN's been a huge force for ill in the world, and the Human Rights Council no exception. I'm pretty excited about this, but what's your reaction?
I'm excited about it too, Alex, and thank you for allowing me to crash your party with Brandon, because I'm fascinated by what he's talking about as well. This is a big deal in the sense that we have watched this particular UN agency go from kind of a parody of this operation, an organization that is made up of the worst kinds of malefactors that the panel is supposed to be addressing. You've got Saudi Arabia, you've got China, you've got Cuba, you've got Venezuela, for example, as members of this so-called Human Rights Council, none of whom have the kind of records on human rights that would stand any rigorous scrutiny. And so instead, the organization spends most of its time focusing on a country that has actually a pretty good human rights record. Not perfect, perhaps, but certainly under the circumstances extraordinarily good, and that is Israel. And then on top of all of that, the U.S. taxpayer, of course, as is true of the UN more generally, winds up picking up the bulk of the tab. So we went through an exercise back in the Bush administration, I believe when John Bolton was our ambassador to the United Nations, trying to fix the UN Human Rights Commission, as it was called then. Wasn't possible. The United States withdrew from it. They promised to fix it. They gave it a new name. It's essentially the same. Donald Trump gave them 17 months to try to clean up their act. Nikki Haley was very specific about the sorts of things that would be required. They didn't. It's more of the same. We're out of there. And I think it's high time, and thank God.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm right with you on that one. Turning back to the border momentarily, there is a national security element to this, which is getting exactly 0% of the attention right now. How do you see that the porous nature of the border and really the refusal of both parties in Washington to come up with some way to get that wall built and to have any sort of common sense border security system put into place? Do you think this issue is getting short shrift, or do you think people are coached up plenty on this and we can focus on other things?
Oh, no, I think this isn't getting nearly the attention that it requires. And I'm no expert on this like Brandon, but I will tell you, Alex, I kind of look at all of these issues through the prism of, is this going to make the problem we've got with people coming across the border illegally more serious or less serious? And I'm concerned that the distraction at best that this business with the separation has created, and at worst, the likelihood that we're going to do what we typically do in Washington faced with something like this, which is, subject to a relentless political warfare operation with a media in full collusion with the hard left and some, let's be honest, so-called Republicans that, insist that everything must be dropped in order to address this particular problem. I believe that this is going to compound the magnet effect of people wanting to come into this country. There will be more people finding kids that will get them in all likelihood not their own, but this is something that I guess is
well, that's certainly happening, Frank. That's certainly happening, and the data is that those numbers have tripled in the 5 months this year so far. But don't you think that there is a possibility that this does backfire on the left? Because, for example, you got countries like Hungary who don't have the widespread illegal immigration issues, at least from my sources who have been there recently, due to the fact that they kind of send a signal that it is a hostile environment. And the left is saying, whether or not it's true, and it's probably not that true, that the United States is very hostile towards illegal immigrants. I mean, isn't that a possibility that this goes the other direction, that maybe it does discourage people, this hysteria?
I think an awful lot of Americans are looking at this in pretty much the same way that President Trump and Jeff Sessions are. And in part, I got to believe they're informed by what they see happening in Europe, where open borders have affected the transformation, the fundamental transformation, I guess Barack Obama would call it, of country after country after country in the continent. And you guys do a great job reporting on that, Alex. This is not something we want in our country. And while reducing it to the microcosmic example of some little girl who's crying because she's separated from her mom tugs at the heartstrings, the fact that it is indeed a situation that is bad and getting worse, that the magnet effect is operating, that we're getting more people coming across that border illegally, and we will, the more they think it's going to turn out okay for them, is a reminder that we cannot go down the route that Europe is already far down. And I think there are an awful lot of Americans, and I think they are voting Americans, by the way, who don't want us to do that. Now, the question is the United States Congress going to poke their finger in their eye, not just on this particular issue of separation, but on amnesty, which I think would alienate those voters and almost certainly cause them to stay home with very, very adverse consequences for Donald Trump and the country.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Frank, we only have a minute left in this segment. I got to get your quick take. U.S. and South Korea, the military drills are officially suspended, though they could probably be pretty easily put back on the calendar. In the meantime, China is doing some dramatic anti-mine drills in the East China Sea now. Are you looking at this as a vulnerability or weakness for us?
Big time, Alex. I think that we're slowly getting people focused on the threat that China represents, and it's a threat that is definitely at work in North Korea, not just in the South China Sea.
All right, Frank Gaffney, president of the Center for Security Policy. Go to securefreedom.org and counterjihad.com, and don't forget to catch his Secure Freedom Minute that takes place whenever we put up those great clips at Breitbart.com of the show. It follows it in most cases, which I really enjoy, catching up on the national security headlines in a quick, concise format. Enjoy that. Enjoy talking to Frank every week. Wish we had more time, buddy. Talk to you next week